One day a man's hands and feet got into discussion with his mind about who was more important. And regardless of the fact, as you might expect, that the mind presented an argument that completely overwhelmed the feet and hands, they still always had the last word. Not to mention the first. One man could think on many subjects, but only one eventually interested him. And curiously enough, it was almost the antithesis of thought. One legend says that after being questioned repeatedly on a certain matter by a man, Muhammad finally responded, "Okay, don't think of it as if you meet the prophet in the road, kill him, try death to every almost." See, curiously enough, the subject of which he became eventually interested was almost the antithesis of thought. It's all right there on the same page, in the same lifetime, in the same universe. One morning the king called his privy counselor to him and revealed, "Last night I dreamed I met a mystic who said to me, 'Once a man knows the truth about life, nothing else is of much importance.' What does it mean?" And his advisor replied, "That you ate too much before bedtime, sire." Every explorer starts out with a destination in mind, whether reasonable or not. And as he perseveres, the goal seems to become clearer. And as it does, so too do the efforts needed to arrive there. But if we're dealing with a true dyed-in-the-bush shorts adventurer here, then the day finally falls upon him wherein he realizes that it is all bullshit. An initial, necessary, misdirected effort to get him going somewhere, and yet it is never actually the place he and everyone else ends up. "Hooray," cries a man in response. "That means my ticket's still good no matter where it's to." And of course, the opposite's also true. If you took everything that you do know and threw it into the Pacific Ocean, and then took everything that you don't and tossed it into the Atlantic, the planet's sea levels would remain the same. And a lad asked his father, "Do you realize what this means?" "Most certainly not," he replied. While the ordinary see life is generally uncertain, and themselves the only partial exception, the few view it almost entirely in reverse and realize that life is certain, for certain, and only their individual potential open to any doubt. Sure, I can put it another way. The many are mostly convinced that they know what they are and what they won't, while the few, through their own efforts and wiring patterns, see quite clearly that they do not, which does neither of them any particular good. But you did want me to put it simpler, didn't you? Well, sure, I can describe it more directly. Ordinary men believe that they know what would make them happier, and even though they do not, they may make some effort along the lines they imagine. Contrasted to that are the few with the hunger who do finally reach the place of clearly realizing what is required for them to sustain the condition of consciousness that truly does give them the conclusive pleasure. But in their case then, they also come face to face with the damn near impossibility of achieving it on a continuing basis. Thus you have on the one hand the majority of humanity who do not understand the purpose of existence, but who believe they do and passively live out their days accordingly. Then another small band who know too much. That's it. Moot City Revisited. One mother so advised a daughter, "Don't ever get in a spitting contest with your thoughts." The speaker addressed the crowd, "Only the ignorant talk of God." And someone in the throng shouted back, "Only the ignorant talk about the king." And another voice from the assembled called out, "Only the ignorant talk about life after death." And still another voice chimed in, "Only the ignorant talk about the foibles of their fellow man." And really loudly, another voice cried out, in apparent desperation of some type, "Well, hell, only the ignorant talk about anything anyway. What the hell you people expect?" And the speaker who had initiated the whole thing said softly to the crowd, "Let's us leave here and go somewhere more agreeable." Then looking directly at the last man he had spoke, added, "and less noisy." There was once a man who attempted to kill himself by falling on his sword. It never worked, and he never recognized that his thoughts, was the sword. The royal advisor so clued the king. The aggressions will never cease as long as bullets cannot, once fired, stop in midair, turn and attack themselves. And the king understood that it was not ordinances under discussion. One father so advised the son, "Never try to wait out your thoughts." That useless sport re-examined. The ordinary believe that holding certain beliefs, specifically those in conflict with the ones they hold, can be deadly, while the few who understand what's going on recognize the morbific nature of all beliefs. The brevity of mystical physicians' office hours is due to the fact that they diagnose but once on any given complaint. A chimpanzee looked down into an ant hole and sighed, "Ah, but that I had such a simple life." And an ant peered back up at him and said, "Anyone who would make such a non-objective, self-serving observation has, in the case of their own mind, simplicity aplenty." There was once a man who had a parrot surgically implanted in his head and a ferret in his stomach. "God only knows why," noted the surgeon, "but a buck's a buck, and the reduction of the redundancy is not my specialty anyway." One man began to think of his mental operations as an automotive transmission, which could run either in automatic or which he could turn into a manual and shift himself. He found the latter more pleasurable, but had real difficulty remembering to take it out of automatic. Of course, that's one of the benefits of automatic, right? Ignorance frightens the ordinary. Weakness, personal weakness, the few. A sure sign of a captive mind is that its greatest dread, it can relate. There once existed a legendary race who spelled and understood freedom to be indifference. Spelling it that way is one thing. Understanding it, quite another. A more insightful man not only does not see life in stark contrasts of black and white, but neither does he see it in shades of gray either. Unless what he's looking at is black, white, or gray. Ordinary men often take as a sign of intelligence the ability to see relative relationships between certain aspects of human affairs, but what they miss is the fact that everything in the strictly mortal realm is relative. That in fact it is only through relative relationships that they exist. Once this is seen afull, it is clear why one thought is always following another. One planet was populated by two classes of species, mathematical creatures and musical creatures. And the musical ones appeared to run the world, yet they both were radically dependent on mathematics. Eden and automobiles. One version of a common creation story says that when the first man to achieve consciousness, Adam, was, for his achievement, driven from the garden, as he left, the angel guarding the gates sounded out a warning to all the other creatures. "Look out, runaway vehicle." The problem with thoughts is that they're magnetic, and you find yourself either being attracted to them or repelled by them, and they don't care either way. All they're after is that you are captivated by them. And in case you haven't seen it yet, it's on this basis that men take life seriously. The civilized will passionately defend their sanity and intelligence. The simple, somewhat less so, which leaves only the crazies and the mystics to take care of everything else. Tonight's mental health news, and good news at that. Only those go crazy who can go crazy. And of your rights. What's your point in pointing out things that people can't do anything about? And damn what potential purpose there is to me doing so didn't damn near get served in that it motivated him to bring up the point. I shan't bore nor run the risk of embarrassing you by asking you if you get it. There was once a man who believed that he had seen better and was able to update a certain old maxim thusly: redundancy is the root of all evil. And life just shook its head and chortled. You still have no idea what's holding everything together where you are. In a mystic's case, the strength that it takes to go on is the strength that it takes to stop going on. In one universe, there was one world in charge of turning out all metaphors, and a second one responsible for later shooting them. And still a third planet in the more advanced area of that reality whose sole job was to shoot down and destroy any non-literal entity it encountered. The enjoyment of electronic communications experienced by people of this planet is due primarily to it assigning each participant a number. There is nothing more certain in the construction of mental cities than of the bricks one receives from his fellow citizen and, after adding his own personal order, passes on. A man with exceptionally good eyesight looked at a civilization and mused, "It's a good thing that men don't know what goes into hot dogs." Mentation and at-home dining. If you only think with thoughts, you'll always either take things literally or take things metaphorically. But the one thing you'll never be able to do is to call for takeout. Mental travel as regards the many and the few. Trains are a series of separate cars connected together, while planes are a single entity that fly alone. Said one man, "Just think, if we just knew where thoughts come from, we could send them back." If you allow yourself to pick out some specific odors in life that you don't like, all of life smells. No. This is why the interests of the stomach and loins are periodic and those of the mind sequential. Inasmuch as the subject of hot dogs arose earlier, and there being such great interest therein, perhaps here is a good place to, perhaps hell, it is a good place to, or else I wouldn't have brought it up. Anyway, here's a good place as any to offer this note of comparison utilizing the wonderful world of sausages. Thoughts are to consciousness filler. Which is why, same as with cheap hot dogs, the addition of spicy condiments is so attractive. Yet another angle to that popular creation tale says that once Adam and Eve, the original mortals, became verbally conscious, it was only then that they became ashamed. And not because, as is normally held, that they were physically naked, but rather because at that initial stage their words were without modifiers to properly cover and conceal. After having helped a genie out of a small jam, a man was offered his choice of rewards, to either have what he knew added to, or else have subtractions made from his ignorance. And turned out that just the involvement in him trying to decide which of the two he wanted was the reward. One conductor's hint to some passengers: the more attention you pay to your thoughts, the less aware you have to be that most of the time the train's not moving. As he rapidly passed by, he shouted out, "I can't stop now," an expression representative of all men who think. To take the impermanent as serious is silly. But for life, as man knows it, to hold together, he must, so silly, act. In a certain land with no limits, trains who learn to trip themselves up become planes. Yeah. And one passenger understood that transportation is not what is being discussed. The simple act more and think less, while the more civilized think more in comparison to acting, which leaves all the other possibilities pretty much open to the rest of us. What do you call someone who can't see any possibilities other than the ones his neighbors see? Ordinary. A fact that can drop new light on the question of mystical sight. Things are never spooky enough for weekend warriors, yet painfully plain for the real variety. This is why there are so few fables touting the pleasures and benefits of being lost in the woods and staying lost therein. There was once a passenger on a train who said, "I think I liked it better before I understood what the trip was about." But I wouldn't take that too seriously. I think he just ate some bad egg salad. The way to tell that you're a victim of your thoughts is that you think that you're thinking them. There's nothing more fascinatingly structured than a good murder mystery. Excluding life, that is. One guy named his new houseboat, "Any god, model, standard, or ideal that can be bummed out or insulted cannot be in any way superior to the person perceiving it." And off he sailed. Guilt and stupidity free. Movement in the head is an illusion. Yeah, I know. An illusion that seems to work. Yeah, I know. A man went to a mystic and said, "I've got this rattle." Well, you didn't think he'd take it to a normal bill mechanic, did you? I mean, after all, it did turn out just to be himself. Wolves who have to sell themselves are no longer true wolves. This is either this evening's zoological update, marketing tip, political commentary, or all three. What keeps the public side of the search for enlightenment alive is not those who have achieved it, but those still struggling. On one mythical express, passengers were offered lectures and had their choice between ones concerning the destination or about the nature of train travel itself. Or for those truly in a hurry, no lectures at all. No. Just some egg salad. Only the simple have secrets, and only the sophisticated imagine that they do. As he sped quickly past himself, a man cried out, "What are you hiding from me?" A man surely of more than routine substance. One man used to think that everything you said about yourself was a lie, then refined that to believing that anything you said about anyone else was a lie. Then narrowed that down to thinking that anything you said about life was a lie. But now, finally, he has reached a place whereat he perceives that anything you say is a you-know-what. One man used to believe that his tongue was his friend, only to discover that it was more a friend to his thoughts. But that was all right, since he believed that his thoughts were his friend. Only to discover that his thoughts were actually more a friend to life than to him. Friendship and veracity. What a combo. As regards the secret, life sends out continual bulletins about it. They're known as men. Of course, as always, the trick is not in the reading material, but in the ability to read. One man mused, "It must be hell not to like music and still have it playing all the time in your head." And Beethoven noted, "Even if you don't care for the third movement, 2 plus 2, 3 still equals 5, and the dead will still converse with you. There was once a mythical land wherein the magnum opus in every art was a work entitled The Great Indifference. One father said to his son, look, even though this doesn't count in real life, I'm going to tell you anyway. You can usually tell in the beginning whether you're talking to a real mystic or not by the fact that he never gives you a straight answer to such an extent that you finally run out of questions. And the lad understood that figures outside of oneself were not what the old man was referring to. One day a passenger stopped the conductor, pulled him down and whispered to him, how far are we from the place where you quit speaking in metaphors? And the ticket puncher replied, closer than I thought, for you to even ask the question, which the traveler understood should now be turned on himself and his thoughts. A guy once mused, the great thing about graduating from the school of life is that you don't get a diploma or have to attend a damn ceremony. By the time that the ordinary are about to die, which is about as close as they ever get to tossing their caps in the air, the mystical few are already on the beach in Daytona. One man decided to plan every thought he would have. His thoughts stopped. This is either our joke for the night, our fable for the day, our latest scientific discovery, or a good place to end tonight's news. The news item that noted that the public life of the search for enlightenment is kept active not by those who have achieved it, but by those struggling for it. I guess I could spend the normal 20 or 30 minutes talking about that, apparently on the literal to semi-metaphorical level. And then at the very last moment, just as you think surely that none of us can keep our balance anymore, and that the voices of the past Walendas are on the floor calling to us, little over further, and we'll all be done for in the final moments, saved only by the fact, before I reveal the great hidden punchline for the night, time runs out. Do you want to jump to it without the middle part? Yes, but how can you tell whether I do or not? Yes. Well, okay, all right. As long as we're in agreement, as long as we understand one another, or as long as we absolutely do not. But all this stuff in the middle, bad egg salad. You'll regret it. Not enough to kill you, perhaps. You just kind of feel stove up all your life. A bit queasy. Not at all sure you should ride the coaster again at this moment. Well, one little literal part to get us going. At first, someone could hear that and take it as being a comment on public figures involved with the so-called mystical activities. And in other words, that if some figure showed up in the past or did contemporaneously, that someone publicly involved with the so-called search for enlightenment, really a part of the public activity, you could take that as being a comment that they certainly haven't achieved it if the news item was valid. But it is a bit more interesting than that. It takes two to have a public life of anything. In other words, you could have someone who had achieved enlightenment that could be in some way that you might hear about it publicly. And that would not deny the genuineness of the news item. Because the only way it would be public would be that there would be some group of people with a real potential to do it themselves. That should be self-evident, or else if he knew what was going on, if there was such a man, he would not be talking to random people. He would not be seeking converts. He would know better than all of that, and he would know that there's really nothing publicly to say. So if you saw a situation that would qualify as being a public side of the search for enlightenment, of course all that would be open to all sorts of speculations verbally as to whether you, speaking generically, whether anybody correctly observed that it was. But just taking on the general basis that there seems to be, especially in the past, it's easier to look at a stuffed animal in a museum, that is in history, and imagine, I always wanted to see a real live armadillo. Even though it's stuffed and can't move and been dead, at least it gives the ordinary mind the feeling like, I always wanted to see a real live ferret. At any rate, we could pretend, play this out historically for a second, that it is not just making a comment that a Buddha type figure. It's not to say that anyone, we'll just take that literally for a second, as all the reports that there was such a person, etc. That it's not to say that Adam is not simply saying that, wait a minute, he was a fraud or he would not have been saying anything publicly. You've got to remember, you've got to face the fact that he would not, even if he did, if he had reached the state, if he knew what it was, if he knew the truth about life, he would not be talking unless there was someone to listen with the real potential to hear it. And then again, you've got to face this. He could not be such a pimplehead as to not have some awareness as to the level, the potential of the people to whom he was talking. So, you'd be faced with this, pressing on, still assuming that I have given a worthwhile description of something in that news item. Then you'd be faced with this, that if you heard something, if there was something that has occurred in the past that was of a public nature, and it did involve someone who knew what was going on, who knew the truth about life, then it also involved some group of people at the time that had the potential to hear it, that he was not addressing the masses. This is where it all, if for no other reason, this is where so-called history, that is where, not that there's any fault on man's part, it's where the mind falls apart, but it's where what's assumed to be recorded history splits inseparably from the reality of what may have gone on, because the stories always tell that if there is some information that men do not normally have that's of value, then by God, it's intended that all men have it. That's the basis of religion. That's the basis of religion, that of all the religions, that something has been revealed to one person or a small group of people of such great significance that it is their duty. They were given the duty. Or else even if the gods hadn't given them the duty, they would immediately recognize the unique value of the information, and therefore it would be inherent in learning the information, it would be inherent a feeling of responsibility to pass it along. No such thing. No such thing. That is the basis of religion, though. That's the basis of selling everything, remember. It's been a while since I pointed out, but recall that at the survival level, from the cortex down, no selling is necessary, not for the functions. You do not have to sell people an idea of drinking water and eating food and going to sleep. It is only when you get into unnecessaries. It only is when you get into the secondary world of the mind or into secondary local aspects of the primary. That is, you do not have to sell people on sleep, but you have to sell them on, buy the thing I make to sleep on. Buy my bed. No, buy my bed. No, buy my mattress. You got to do that. And you certainly, when you get above the area that could be, when you get to an area that can be easily and properly contrasted to the bowel necessary, the survival necessary, if you get into the area of CDs, movies, automobiles, anything that is not directly necessary for survival, then you are totally dependent upon marketing, salesmanship, selling. There's just, well, you understand that. Unless you tell somebody, unless you constantly tell them why you need an antiperspirant. I mean, why you have got to have it. There's no chance if you just laid one down, like you did if you laid down a leg of lamb out by a roadside, almost every man that came by, or a glass of lemonade, almost everybody that came by would partake thereof. If you lay down a stick of deodorant, if you laid down a one of these fragrance things you put in your house, or if you put down a home curling kit, hair curling kit, just all the many things that just part and parcel of everyday civilization, and you laid it down, just laid it there. You do understand that not, just given the situation I'm describing, it would lay there until it petrified. I mean, even if people came by and looked at it, you know, maybe kicked it or something and thought, you know, that's a weird looking thing. It has got to be sold. There's nothing intrinsically attractive about it. When it gets to the world of the mind, and ordinary people can see that. I could get some kind of humorous reaction that would display a slight seeing of what I'm pointing to, and then, as always, the ordinary mind would forget it. But what it cannot see, period, is when you get into areas anywhere beyond the relative, the possible simplicity of such things as home hair curling kits and underarm deodorants. Once you get past that level and you get into areas such as the ideas of government, religion, mysticism, and if you point out to men again that it is totally unnecessary, totally, in the same way that men having ties, women having good brasiers, or any brassiere. In other words, all the useless condiments of civilized existence. Once you get past that, which you can make physically sort of obvious and laugh at, or get people to laugh at, if you get into the area that is strictly an output of the neural system, the higher end of the nervous system, such as all the ideas of civilization, all the theories that reach into religion, or at the source of, the base of religion and politics, philosophy, then the mind cannot see it. All the thing the ordinary mind can do, since it's dealing with thoughts, and since thoughts are magnetic, it will either take what you say and theoretically accept half of it and say, well, all right, what you're saying is there is some validity, because there are some people with some absolutely crackpot ideas as regards religion. And you ask the person saying that, well, you're religious? And they go, well, yeah, I'm Catholic. And you go, but you don't consider yours crackpot. Well, certainly not. So you're talking about, in other words, Catholic views are not crackpot. No. So then you go over to, well, you know where it's going. You go to the group that he called crackpot, and you say the same thing to them, and they're very likely to include, or specifically point to, Catholicism as a real crackpot misuse of religion. So, even though the mind can, and you can do it with politics, we'd be talking about one-man governments, or we'd be talking about republics. And whichever ideas that your mind is attracted to, the mind will agree with what I'm saying. Yeah, part of it is silly and useless, but it's always selective, which was a news item for those of you that missed it tonight, that said if you select certain odors in life that you don't like, all of life smells, stinks. You can't do it. Of course, you have to do it in the mind, but I'm insinuating there's something beyond the mind. Now back to where we were, really. Let's go from politics and religion and refine it a little bit. The whole idea of changing one's consciousness, which is doing something with this thing called thought. At first it would seem that people must be sold on that. Or else why is the word mysticism, why is any term that I may have used or anyone else, change of consciousness, a consciousness without comment. Why has you ever heard of that? Using you again generically, why is that a known term in the intellectual marketplace, even for those people who have no active interest therein. Such comments: liberation of consciousness, the awakening of consciousness, enlightenment. Any sophisticated, well-read person on this planet now knows the term enlightenment and could attribute it to Buddha. And that supposedly was some kind of supernatural state that he claimed that once he was in it, he knew everything. Any educated person on this planet knows that much. That's what I'm getting at. And so if you point out to them what I'm saying about all ideas that arise from the world of the intellect must be sold. Even more so than deodorant and starch in your shirts. That when you get into the area that is strictly non-physical, the world of ideas, the further removed the idea seems to be from survival. See, because you could have ideas, someone could be trying to sell the ideas of how to more cheaply produce your own potable drinking water. No. Or somebody could be selling ideas about how to produce your own food at home for no money and no effort. That the less effort you made, the better your food would grow. That would be one thing. But when we're talking about the ideas such as politics, religion, and now even more specifically, even more specific, of a more specific nature, that which points to some change in one's internal state of mind, not just ideas from the mind, but a change of the mind itself, some alteration. And people would say, well, you mean like the idea of enlightenment? And I could say, okay. And they would say, now I could say, but did you hear what I just said about the ideas must be sold? And they go, well, yeah, and that still fits in. And I said, no, it doesn't fit in. Because these ideas cannot be sold. The reality of it cannot be sold. And then the other person can say, well, what the hell, how do I know even the idea about enlightenment and Buddha sitting under a tree and getting enlightened, whatever the hell it is? How do I know that if it wasn't public? Why is that? Assuming that my first news item still remains valid. Why is that? Hold on, passengers. We're trying to get somewhere. Now jump totally into your own mind. Everyone's mind believes that there is something. Anyone that could be as sold, anyone who could be as close to enlightenment as possible. They are still sold on the idea that there's something, the information, that which I am gaining, is still of some importance. In fact, if verbally confronted in a non-aggressive manner, such people would probably want to say that they are guessing, or they're pretty sure that there's simply some piece of knowledge, some little something that they have yet to understand that they should do is the only thing stopping them from achieving it. That is the mind, on its own basis, being the world's first, natural, and best salesman. It is marketing, even in the area that would apparently have almost nothing to do, or at least as little to do with the ordinary affairs of man as possible. That is the idea inherent in all mysticism, that this would apparently have as little to do with the practical everyday affairs of man as anything possible, and to that I will not disagree. But even if that be true, then what are you going to make of the fact of me still insisting that it must be sold, and it can't be sold, and if you think it is being sold, you're not seeing the situation aright, and yet there you are in your own mind. Well, we can get dirty. What the hell? I brought in a referee tonight from New Jersey, so he's not really going to notice if I try and aim certain impacts below the belt. How about a better example of all this, right where we were? How about the fact that there you sit, and people out there read things I write, watch me on TV, but there you sit listening. I'm going, yes, yes, yes. Well, it's all of help. I know. Yeah. Well, it's got to be. I know. Well, it has been. Yeah. I wish you wouldn't do that. Oh, okay. Does somebody remember the news item from a few nights ago that said it's alleged that there was a certain document that was stolen from God's personal, private files. And on this particular document was made note the fact that God himself refers to men who try to sell any other men anything as pathetic turd rollers. Would the big guy mislead us? I mean, if that, for whatever reason, I don't know whether he just made a personal note, whether he's working on his memoirs or just a reminder, but if the big guy took the time and effort to write that down, and I think I can speak for most civilized, genteel people in saying that even from him, is a bit harsh to say that. So the point being, if he would actually put that down and run the risk of it historically, or falling into the historic hopper, that is, of it finally coming to light as it has done, if that's what he put down, knowing the risk that he ran by putting any of his thoughts, like any mere mortal, that anytime you put down your private thoughts on a permanent record, you run the risk. There is a risk, no matter how small, that someday it will come to light. The point is, if he, in his infinite wisdom, would write that down, can you imagine what he really thinks? No. And yet, all of life, at the survival level, is a matter of advertising, or a matter of sales sans advertising. See, a gazelle is part of the food chain to a lion, and for it to show up in a lion's neighborhood, to show up at a water hole, is to sell itself, but it does not require advertising. It does not have to encourage. A gazelle does not walk down to the water, and if nothing happens, begin to whistle or to hold up a sign hollering, "Juicy gazelle," or "I'm young and tender." There is no advertising required. If you get above the line, without advertising, nothing happens. And you get to what would seem to be the highest possible area in the non-physical, that is, the attempt to change one's own consciousness, the search for enlightenment, then that would seem to require even superselling. And at first you could say it would, even though I was taking the general anathematic approach up till now, and say, well, it should, because it is the strangest, it is the most obscure, it offers the least even promise of reward, because even religion, even though it's just part of the same constructed imaginary city as everything else, but at least religion promises stuff, that stick with me and after you die, hey, things will be good. And mysticism doesn't promise anything. And so you would think that if mysticism is some refined, higher form of the reality behind religion, that if it takes all the advertising that it does to keep religion going, which I guess people don't normally think about this way, but religion is worse than politics. For those of you that never thought about that, a political figure, no matter our showbiz, same thing, but no matter how famous a guy is, or a group, somebody, their latest record, their latest book, or a politician, even though he was governor of your state or he was a senator, to the point that while he was active, while he was in office, that he'd walk in a room and people would just stand up, and people would even give a semi-regal bow, that he was really somebody. And the man gets voted out of office. Those of you who don't know it, it comes as a shock to many of these old out-of-work wolves. 2 weeks later, after they're out of office, 1 month after your last hit when you were number one, or maybe a year later, you hadn't had a hit on the charts in a year. For the last 6 months, you've been riding the oldies circuit, playing some nice bars along the panhandle of Florida. But a year before, you could not get out of your car at a 7-Eleven store driving to a gig without groupies, people rushing up to you. And now here it is, less than a year later, and nobody even remembers you. Or a senator, a man to whom lobbyists curried favor, insisted, here, have some more money for your campaign. Now you can use it next year. 2 weeks out of office, they won't answer his calls. It's just, all right. The thing is, that's what I was really about to point at, is you have to continue in power and you have to continue advertising. Being in power is the advertising. Or if you're running for office, you can just be running for office and become famous and people be impressed. But if you do not keep your name before the public, if you do not keep the ads on TV, you do not keep the signs up, you can be popular for 1 week. I mean, extremely popular. People impressed, but you must keep your name before the public. Did I get too far afield? How about Coca-Cola? As far as I know, they spend more money than any other company in the world on advertising. And it's the same product, nothing's changed, they change the can every now and then, and you think, well, why? It's the largest selling food product, I believe, in the world, and has been for years and years, and yet they spend more. And first you can say, well, why? If it's the largest selling food product in the world, and as far as drink, I think it's like twice the size in sales as its closest competitor. And you would think, well, why do they keep advertising? Somewhere along the way, life has taught some people, some collective groups of people, that you cannot ease up. It has been tried, as a matter of fact, companies that were doing so well, commercial enterprises. And they thought, why are we spending 1/10 of our gross national sales every year on advertising? Hell, we get bigger and bigger every year. And they slash drastically their advertising. 2 years later, they're bankrupt. And they're all standing around, what happened? The more unnecessary something is, the more it must be promoted. And the more it must be kept before the public eye. And as I started out where this all was a few minutes ago, as people don't, I'm sure, do not normally look at it this way, but religion has to advertise itself as much as any other enterprise on this planet. And the sidebar, back to the main point. So you could think, you would be within your rights to think, well, in that area, if religion, for instance, has to advertise and continually promote itself, it must be relentless. You cannot take off a decade. You can't, the church, any church cannot decide, well, let's knock off 50 years and just kind of, regroup, count our blessings, take a sabbatical. Things are not going anywhere. Right now we got more adherents than any other church on this planet. If they did that for 50 years and came back and decided to open the doors, they'd probably have to start putting in Taco Bells, using them for used storage places. So if that be true about religion, then if that which is even more refined, more exotic, more specialized than religion, the search for enlightenment itself, the actual search, then you could at first say, well, it has to be even more advertised. There must be more promotion behind that than religion, because you've got a smaller potential audience. It offers even less. Even though religion doesn't offer anything but illusion and promises, the search for enlightenment doesn't offer even that. So you think, well, Jesus, if it's going to have any public life at all, you're going to have to beat that son of a bitch to death publicly. You're going to have to keep a continuing, string of cheap airplanes, of course, running banners across the beach. You're going to have to stay on some kind of cable TV, somewhere, cheap, some free newspaper to keep your ads. You got to do something to keep it going. That would be one damn near predictable view of it. Except for this, if you can see it, there is no such thing going on, and never has been. Because the public, what is seen as the public aspect, the public life of the search for enlightenment, is supported, is due to, is fueled only by those still struggling for it. Now remember, we're not talking about just one person. We're talking about that if somebody is even doing it publicly, that means that there's some other person or persons who have the potential to hear it. So from another view, once you see it, there never has been any promotion for this. There's promotion for what appears to be this. And there's promotion and advertising and knowledge, public knowledge of what appears to be this. And no matter what I say to you, you'll think that that is true to some degree right up to the moment you step into it. Right into the moment until you have the experience, you still think, well, there is something to what I've been reading. I mean, there is. I mean, it's obvious. I'm better off now having studied in great detail the teachings of some guru, of some master, of Buddha, of trying to metaphorically analyze the Old Testament. Anything. And you can say, and I'm certainly not going to deny it. If it was just you and I talking, all I would do is try and smile and do my best imitation of the enigmatic Buddha. No. Not being good, I might sneer, but anyway, it's the thought that counts. No, it's not. But I can't stop and make up everything. At any rate, you could say, well, my studies, my metaphysical studies all these years have benefited me. I know. Because if we're going to take one of these figures, look at them. I assure you that they went through the same stuff. Yeah, more or less. They might not have read and stayed involved as long as you, but that's a moot point. I mean, for everybody to say, well, I hear people say, well, boy, I feel left out because, you know, Jesus was awake by the time he was 32. And Buddha, the best they can figure, was at least that age. And what little reports there are, which amounts to almost none, of Zoroaster, you know, he's open to everything. You know, people say, well, hell, the man was born enlightened. You know, and so anyway, somebody can say, well, you know, if Moses was already in the conscious promised land before he was 40, look at me, what chance have I got? And you might as well give that up, because if you're past, you say, well, Jesus was 32, and I go, how old are you? And you go, 33. And what the hell are you whining about? I mean, unless you found some use for it, and then clue me in. For those of you who didn't like the visitor who came to Earth, and we found out that one of the most revered and dearly loved songs on this planet was a song called Precious Memories, he thought, well, how precious. So if back to where we were again. If you can see it, you'll finally see that there has never been any promotion of this. There cannot be. There's been no real public activity of this. I know that it appears to be, and I know that people study it. And in the same way that I mentioned that on some mythical expresses, they offered lectures to the passengers. That's all that those are. One thing, the lectures help if your own thoughts won't do it. A lecture listening to someone else talk is just an excuse to substitute for listening to you think. And a conductor in another news item did not point out, he said, well, one thing about it, if you pay a strict attention, real close attention to your thoughts, at least it makes you have to be less aware of the times, which is most of the time, that the train's not moving. So if you don't like that, you read books, you go to lectures, and they have lectures on the great mystical adventure. And you get down your seat, get a window, sit by, you go, all right. And so, it's either listening to somebody else talk or listening to you think. But all it does is help distract you from the fact of the times when the train's not going anywhere. Which is, I thought you'd never ask. Which is when you're thinking about it. Don't do that! Oh. There's a sign, in all humility, I hate to brag, but I would say there's a sign of at least impending an increase in consciousness for a man to be able to play at least 2/3 of the Three Stooges by himself. Your mind, no matter what you say, no matter if I tried to make this like a true sermon, if I said, by God, this is so serious, I want everyone to, give me your hand, pledge that you will really stop doing this. Which I'm not going to do, because all I was going to do is make it worse. But if I did that, and to the point metaphorically, and you thought, all right, I understand, what you're trying to do is insist of the importance of this. I go, okay. That you will quit thinking, that you will quit accepting anything that passes through your mind. Forget where it came from. If it goes through your mind, it's noise. It's bullshit. It's magnetic attraction or repulsion. But anything that goes through your mind about the search for enlightenment is a detriment. And even if you went, all right, I damn near got it. I can see a little bit of it. But you're right. I'll struggle against it. Oh, I'm doing good. Because your mind still sells you on what it thinks. And I say your mind does. You know, that itself is misdirecting. Life does. For the man in another news item tonight that says he thought his tongue was his friend. Yeah. Only to discover that his tongue was more a friend to his mind than it was him. But then it got worse. But, well, no, at first he thought, well, that's all right, because even if that's true, because my thoughts are my friend. But then that's where it got doubly, extremely odious, because he finally realized my thoughts are more a friend to life than they have ever been to me. And that man only saw a part of it. But your thoughts are selling something. Everyone's thoughts. Doesn't matter. It's only ordinary people who think that the thoughts they have are of any specific significance one way or the other. Thoughts itself is to keep man in a certain position. Thoughts are life's advertising in man's nervous system. It is your Times Square billboard. And it runs through, playing out the messages. And if you're ordinary, you stand right there on this planet. Might as well be stripped naked and everybody away from you. And there you stand. And here it is, that Sony or whatever corporation has it now, that running billboard in Times Square flashing these advertising messages, and you standing there believing that you're thinking this. No. And not one time, even if that was true, let me point this out, not one time does the message ever do anything, promote anything of any individual benefit to you, even if it was true, which it's not. But if it was true that that was you thinking, and you could stand out, you could walk away and look at it, then you're still stuck with a conundrum, to say the least. That what I'm advertising is not to my benefit. I'm a free, walking, frigging billboard for somebody else. Getting close. That's why this can't be promoted, and that's why you should never listen. That's why, even to yourself, because we'll assume by now that most of you are immune to being captured by the wiles of some charismatic cult leader. Yeah. I know. But you don't need to be. You've already been captured by one much more fascinating, much more alluring, and may I say one who is not. The question of charisma does not even come into play. And he or she is very well known to you. Very well, in a figure of speech. You're being sold. Life, things are arranged so cleverly that even when you're attempting to become a non-consumer in the general marketplace of life, life will then make you get all involved with what you consider as non-commercial affairs, and still have you working for it, still have you shopping, still having you spend your money, which is your mental energy, in its markets. The moral tonight being, don't listen to nobody.